Thanks. Right, well, good morning everyone and welcome to this meeting of the Integration Joint Board. Under IJB standing orders, the chairmanship rotates between NHS Grampian and Aberdeen City Council, and the bad news is that Luann's period as chair has come to an end. I'm afraid you've got me. So this is my first one in the chair. Well, before we move on, I'd like to put on record my thanks to Luann for all her work as chair of IJB. I think she's been absolutely fantastic. Sorry, I hope I didn't mean to embarrass you, but if I do half as well as Luann has done, I will be going far wrong. So, and the good news is that she is staying on as vice chair to help keep me on the straight and narrow. So, huge thanks to Luann. I'm also aware that this is Mike Adams' last meeting. Mike, after 40 years, 41, sorry, Mike, with the NHS, is retiring at the end of May. We were talking earlier, Mike said he's actually been involved with the IJB since the time when it was a shadow IJB back in 2016. So he's made a fantastic contribution, has spoken up consistently for the staff side of things, but also I think has contributed more broadly. I've always regarded Mike as a voice of common sense. So again, put on record our thanks to Mike for all his hard work and wish him well for a long and happy retirement. At this point, I will hand over to Emma to do the housekeeping and roll call and so forth. So over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning and welcome to the meeting of the Integration Joint Board. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting and we have some people in the health village and others participating remotely. The meeting is being recorded and published online after the meeting. I ask that all attendees leave their camera on, but switch off their microphone when not speaking, but that both camera and microphone are switched on when you are invited to speak, so that this is picked up and recorded. If you wish to speak, please use the raise hand function or indicate in the meeting chat and I will alert the chair. We'll now do a roll call and we'll ask that members confirm their attendance when their name is called, so that this is clear in the recording and can also be recorded for the minutes. Chair.
Present.
Vice Chair.
Here, good morning.
Councillor Allard.
Good morning, President.
Councillor Craig.
Present.
Councillor Tissera.
Good morning, it's Sandra McDonald here. I'm subbing for Councillor Tissera this morning. Thank you.
Kim Christensen.
Morning, present.
June Brown.
Good morning, present.
Sandra McLeod. Good morning. Paul Mitchell.
Yeah, good morning, I'm here.
Caroline Howard.
Morning, I'm here.
Christine Hemming. Stephen Close. Mike Adams.
Here.
Jenny Gibb.
Morning, everyone.
Jim Curry. Graham Simpson. Maggie Hepburn. Shirley McFarlane. Alison Murray.
Here.
Alan Chalmers. And our apologies from Shona Oman Smith and Phil Mackey will join you.
Thank you, Emma. So we've got a busy and varied agenda today, and if we are still going at 11:45 or thereabouts, I'll propose we take a wee comfort break just to break things up and make sure we're not going on for 3 hours at a time. If I forget, Emma can throw something at me or kick me under the table, that will remind me to take a comfort break. Moving swiftly on, do we have any declarations of interest or transparency statements? Nope, not seen.
I will say yes, in the scheme of governance, it covers carers' expenses. I'm not a carer, who should be receiving expenses.
Fine. And I don't think you need to leave for that. I think that's just a transparency statement. The next item is determination of exempt business. Can we agree that we take item 9.1 in private?
Agreed.
Okie doke, thank you very much. Which brings us on to the video presentation, which this time is from NES, North East Sensory Services. The full video, I understand, runs for about 10 to 12 minutes or thereabouts. We normally have the video presentations just lasting 5. So Emma will stop it after about 5 minutes, and then we'll circulate the link to the full video so that people can see the whole thing at their leisure after the meeting. So Emma, if we could have the video, please.
My name is Graham Finlay. I'm Chief Executive of North East Sensory Services, better known as NES. If you have a visual impairment or a hearing impairment, there could be all sorts of issues that you face in your day-to-day life, but there's always a way around it. There's always another way of doing things. There's always support around. There's always equipment and help around.
My name's John Derek Mitchell, and I'm suffering from macular degeneration. The condition started when I was in my job in sea. I went outside, everything turned pink, and that's when I knew I had a problem. I got sent home, saw the specialist, then went to see the surgeon commander at the Navy, and then that was me out the Navy. When I was sent home to see the specialist, then it's gradually sunk in. It's devastating news. At that time, it takes a long time to sink in. But after a period of time, you have to adapt to it. It's not easy, but you just have to get on with it, really.
Hello, my name is Sonia Sivai. I am 29 years old. I have a 2 hearing aids disability, and I have one arm amputated as well. It all started when I was pregnant. Basically, when I found out I was pregnant back in 2013. I had a social worker back then because there was a lot going on, like how am I gonna look after the baby, what's gonna happen, and there's a lot of drama. Nobody knew what was gonna happen, you know what I mean? Like, okay, Sonia's pregnant. Okay, she's got one arm, she's deaf, she needs some sort of support. But there was no one, like my family, my mom and dad, they had no idea what kind of support needed or where to find the support. So
my name's Narita. All my family are deaf. My parents are deaf, my children are deaf, my sister's also deaf. I found out about NES through my husband, who'd received letters printed in English which we both struggle to understand as it's not one of our first languages. We brought them along to NES where the contents on the letters were explained to us, and any follow-up forms were also completed. I found the whole process quite smooth.
If somebody has a sight or hearing loss, a significant sight or hearing loss, what we would always say is get in touch. With 6,500 people we support across the northeast of Scotland who've got a significant sight loss or a significant hearing loss, or in many cases both. People come to us through all referral routes. It can be through medical profession, through the hospital system, or people can just turn up, or people can self-refer or have heard about the support they can receive from NES. What we would say is we've got a person-centred approach. So as soon as somebody comes to NES, presented to us, or we find out about them, you will be offered a visit from one of our social workers. Social worker will come and see you, will carry out a personal assessment of need with you and in your own home, so it's all familiar surroundings and everything else. From then, everything starts. So depending on what your interests are, depending on what areas you're finding difficulty with, Ness is here to help you.
Ness, they help me out with all my paperwork, like my personal independence payments, because I can't see the paperwork. If you've got any problems with paperwork, make an appointment, go in and see them. They do the cane training, and it's normally a 6-month sort of course to get used to the cane. I did it in 6 weeks. But without him, I honestly, it made a world of difference. As I said earlier on, I never left the house for 3 weeks because I was terrified to go out, because I didn't know what I would bump into, who I would knock over, or things like that. But since Lindsay and Kate helped me with my cane walking, I'm an independent person.
Letters are a particular struggle, especially if they are written in formal English, so I would need to bring them along to be interpreted into British Sign Language. Phones are inaccessible to deaf people, so we would need to find alternative ways to organise appointments. When I'm in the Ness office, staff would help me to understand the contents of letters and fill out any necessary forms that need to be posted away. I found the process to be straightforward.
So thank you for that, Emma. As I say, Emma will circulate the link so that we can see the whole video. I think the videos were one of Luann's innovations at IJB, which I certainly intend to continue with, because I think it does two things. It reminds us that although we have a formal partnership, there's a whole bunch of organisations out with the formal partnership that we need to work with. And also, I think in terms of getting us into the kind of IJB mindset, is good at the start of the meetings, because it can be very easy to kind of slip into just looking at the nitty-gritty of the papers and doing transactional stuff. But I think it's important that we remind ourselves about the folk that we're here to serve. So a great video, and and we'll circulate the link to the whole thing. So thank you for that. That brings us on to the minutes of the meeting of 31st January, item 4.2. Is everybody content that this is a correct record? No. Okay. Any matters arising that folk want to raise? Not seeing any hands. Okay, good. That takes us to the minutes of the Risk and Audit Committee on the 28th of February. And again, does anyone have any comments on the factual accuracy? Not seeing anything. Martin, is there anything you particularly wanted to draw our attention to, or is it fairly straightforward?
I think it's all fine. It's an accurate record. All in order. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, in which case we'll move on to 4.4, which is the minutes of the Clinical and Care Governance Committee on the 21st of February. And again, Kim, is there anything you want to draw our attention to in particular?
No, nothing in particular. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, are we content then that this is a correct record? Yep. Okay. Which brings us on to the committee planner. Fraser, do you want to draw our attention to anything in particular?
Nothing in particular this morning. The planner should be updated, so it's there for noting, and of course any questions if any members have any.
So does anyone have any questions on the planner? Not seeing any hands. going worryingly smoothly. Don't worry, it'll go wrong soon. That brings us to 4.6, which is the seminars and workshops planner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks to colleagues around the table, looking at Emma as well. You can see we're starting to drop in a few more dates for the specific seminars. There are some where we don't have dates yet for them, but we're on the case. Had a period of annual leave recently as well, which had us just finalising some dates, but we're getting there.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks, Fraser. Okay, that then brings us. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Fraser, just in terms of timescales for that extra date, so we're still looking at a day before the summer holidays or one of our seminars, or are we looking at? I know there's one that's tagged on to the end of an IGD here, but are we still looking at an extra separate Tuesday, or will that be after August?
I think if we can get one in before summer recess, we would certainly try and do that. Certainly no restriction on the Tuesdays we're looking at. It's just trying to make sure we've got the relevant folk who are leading on the seminars available.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, any more?
Yeah, got a question.
Go ahead, Martin.
Thank you. Could I ask if we'll be issued with invitations to seminars and workshops? I mean, there's one or two that really interest me, such as Gurphy, and there are others. Just what's the procedure with informing people of what's happening there?
Yeah, if the invitations haven't gone out yet, we'll take an action to do that.
Great, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Not seeing any hands. Okay, that brings us on to item 4.7, the Chief Officer's report, which is in the additional circulation. Sandra, do you want to say anything?
Thank you, Chair. So assuming everyone has had opportunity to read the paper, a couple of things I would just like to draw people's attention to. One is that you'll note on the recommendations that we're looking to extend the existing carers role, given that through COVID this has been slightly different, so looking for approval of that. Also looking for just the core. But a couple of key things. We've got some staff changes, so just that I would take the opportunity to congratulate staff members and to see how thankful I am that they're part of our team. So we now have Fraser, who's in substantive role as Chief Operating Officer. We have Kay Dyack, who's in substantive role as Strategic Pathways Lead, which is a new role which will really help to move forward a lot of our discharge planning, and also to Judith McLennan, who is at Cornhill as Inpatient Specialist Services. Huge title, as you can see in there, but she takes over from Jane, who's retired. So really just like to welcome everybody on board. The other key part I would really like to raise is just people's attention to, and I'm sure board members may well have seen that on the news, is the ongoing discussion and debates about the National Care Service, the National Care Home contract, and about how that is not really agreed yet. There's been some interim measurements that have been put in to help support providers. Initially involved in the team will be working through that, but really just to say that we're keeping a very close eye on that and working with our providers locally, and will respond accordingly to things as they'll gradually updated if there's anything significant that arises because of that. The only other thing that I would like to add for any questions is to thank Ross, because he's taking the helping the author of the report, just to say thank you for doing such a great job, and that's me.
Thank you, Sandra. Questions or so, Christian?
I don't have a question, I'm just saying that on the chat I see that people cannot hear the speakers, so we maybe have to do something more.
Ross?
No, I don't like this.
Would it be helpful if we were presenting papers then to move down towards the mic?
That might well work, I think. Right, so yeah, I don't know whether you heard that or not, but what we're going to do is if folk are presenting papers, they'll move around close to the mic, and we'll keep the fingers crossed that it works. Okay. Right. Any questions on the report?
Yes.
Oh, Martin.
Thank you. It's a really welcome positive report. It's good to see in one place some extremely positive work going on, such as the UNCRC and other things. There's also mention there of the new vaccination centre, and I'm just wondering if that's on time, if that's likely to meet its expected target of, I think, was it June, of a date in June.
Yeah, Chair, I can. It is on target, but I could bring in Sandy. I'm not sure you'll be able to update us, Sandy, on that. Conscious that we might be able to.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. The formal position is, as of last Friday, John Lewis was sold to another developer, so that part of it is completed. We haven't yet, through NHS Grampians, signed on the dotted line with the owners of the now owners of the Bonaccord Centre. Sorry, but everything's going well. They've been extremely keen, and we're doing some things already, even though we haven't signed on the dotted. So I think, to answer the question, I would expect this to be there and schedule, probably open maybe the first week of June, to be confirmed. But everything's going well behind the scenes. Thank you.
Okay, that's good to hear. Yeah, it will be really welcome to get the formalities out of the way, so to speak. So just to check, so there'll be a smooth transition in providing the service. I mean, you're not expecting any delays or any hiccups. That people will, the access to vaccination will just continue in a smooth way.
I'll come back in again, Chair. Is that okay?
Yep, please do.
Yeah, a couple of things. What we've done currently and recently, we've been doing quite a lot of our vaccinations out with the vaccination centre. So quite a lot of the spring booster campaign has been in care homes. So we've been prioritising and moving staff to that. We've also been prioritising and moving staff to the housebound vaccinations. So big chunks of the programme currently are not in the vaccination centre, and we also have still the options to keep using Bridgedawn and Airy Hall Clinic, and we're using them differently too. So the show continues, but we're actually very, very quiet in the former John Lewis, but actually the programme is quite busy elsewhere across the city.
Okay, thanks for that. I think that's really good. It's really welcome to have that inventive and adaptable approach to make sure that you're reaching out to the most vulnerable in particular. So that's great. Thank you for that.
Comment, yes.
Yes,
so on the UNCRC, it's not an act yet. It's still a bill. It's not been incorporated. It's not been enacted, I think's the word. I get muddled up. It was found to conflict, so it was stopped by the Supreme Court, and it was stopped in a couple of years ago now, and it's still waiting for changes to be made so that it becomes competent for the Scottish Government Parliament. So it's not been enacted.
Okay, thanks for that. Any more? Sandra?
Yes, thank you. Again, it's going back to the vaccination centre part of your report, Sandra. Thanks for your report. I have used with my elderly mum Airy Hall. It is fantastic to be able to use Airy Hall. I'm sure those who use Bridgedawn would say the same. With John Lewis, what are the plans to perhaps make the news a bit wider about it? Now, I take on board what Sandy's just said about things are not quite at the finishing line yet, but what are the comms going to be around that? Because I think it is important that people are getting geared up for it. And when I was at Airy Hall, there were actually one person came in who wasn't eligible for their booster at that, or their jab at that time. So there's all of that to be managed as well, I guess. But yeah, just comms around that, please.
Who can, which officer can pick
I
that one
can
up?
come back again, Chair, if you want. We have a draft press release, draft comms ready. We're guided, obviously, until we sign on this. It's a rental rather than a purchase. Until we sign on the sort of rental dotted line, we can't say anything. We also want to give our new landlords, so to speak, the owners of the Bonnecourt Centre, the opportunity to kind of talk positively, which I imagine, I haven't seen what they're writing, but I'd imagine they're extremely pleased we're here. So we have got a plan in the background too, and we haven't yet agreed this, but we are kicking around some ideas around potentially slightly renaming it with a kind of slightly, to give it a flavour of a more broader focus rather than just the vaccination centre. But that has still to be agreed, and we haven't yet agreed what that will be. But we are trying to take the opportunity of a public-facing, real-world space where people will walk by and think, oh, actually, I could go and get my blood pressure done there, or I could go and get my ear syringed, or whatever. There's a couple of suggestions, but those are the kind of things. So we have got a plan, but we can't do anything till we sign on the dotted, if you like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Chair, it's just to say that this particular initiative is very, very important to the George Street area. I have to say it does make a difference to there's a difference in parking, there's a difference in footfall, and ultimately people do a little bit of shopping when they're there as well. So it's very good for the George Street Traders Association and very important to that locality.
Thanks, Andrew. I think that's a point very well made. Anyone else wanting to come in?
Yes.
No, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back to the UNCRC issue. Maybe an officer can provide us with an update. I'm very aware that functionally we are moving towards embedding children's rights very fundamentally into the work of the IGB, the council, and all the partners. So I just wonder if it might be possible for us to have some kind of reassurance to know that process is continuing. It's a really important, helpful way for us to make sure that we're identifying and doing our best to address the needs of every child. So it is a really important policy. It's a major strategy that we are working actively towards. So I just wondered if somebody might be able to give us a little bit of reassurance and a little bit of background on where we are.
Fraser?
Yeah, I can come in there, Chair. As has been said already, the bill's still in the process of being incorporated into legislation, and we'll keep an eye on how that process materialises over the next few weeks and months. But a lot of the activity we're doing because it's the right thing to do, whether it's statutory or not. And we can give assurance that this very much is top of the agenda for us and for the Council, NHS Grampian and beyond. And I think that's symbolised in the recent approval of the children's plan for Aberdeen, and the Integration Joint Board is right at the heart of that. We've got representation on the Children's Services Board for the city that will be monitoring completion of that Children's Services Plan, and indeed there's significant overlap between the delivery plan for that children's plan and the delivery plan for the IGB strategic plan. So we're all pulling together in one direction. We're all keeping an eye on the horizon to see what changes might come down the line from a statutory perspective. But in the meantime, we continue to do what's right for the city.
Thank you for that. Any more comments or questions?
Sorry.
Well, no,
Right.
I'll throw you first.
So,
Sorry.
mine's just a comment really, and it was just to say thanks to our carer reps for sticking with us for the last 3 years, and I'm really delighted that they're staying with us, both Stuart and Alison, for another period of time. That our carers bring an important voice to our table, and they're really valued here. So thank you, Alison.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Luann. Sorry, yeah.
Thanks. I was just going to add, in terms of the UNCRC, there's a paper later on in the agenda around about revised equality outcomes and mainstreaming framework. And you'll notice in that paper that we've also incorporated the articles from the UNCRC into the impact assessments that we do for papers that we bring to, or for any policy or practice decision that we make. So just to give assurance there as well.
Thanks for that, Alison. Any more? Not seeing any more hands. in which case, actually, can I add my congratulations to those with new roles? Add my congratulations to Sandra's comments, and in which case, can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you. Great. That brings us on to item 5.1, which is the integration scheme of governance. Can I ask John Forsyth to highlight anything in this?
Can do. Would you like me to move round?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. I'll find a seat. Not sure if everybody in the camera can actually see me, but can I just check that everybody can hear me before I get going? Excellent. So the report before the board today, I think, really has three main strands. So I'll start with the most straightforward one, which is the officers are looking for the board's agreement to appoint the Chief Operating Officer to substitute for the Chief Officer in the absence of the Chief Officer, and this just really reflects that we now have a substantive Chief Operating Officer in Fraser. The second main strand is to do with the integration scheme, and looking for the board to endorse that. The integration scheme, as members will be aware, is the document which underpins the IJB. I think some members will have seen this previously because it was approved by NHSG Board and by Aberdeen City Council earlier in the year, and is currently off with the Scottish Government for final approval. They're still looking at that. I got a message last Friday from the Scottish Government saying it's still with their legal team. Once they come back with any comments, I think we probably have a couple of minor amendments we'd probably like to make to the integration scheme at that point as well. Most notably, I think, including Murray hosted services into it, which was overlooked, unfortunately. There's also an appendix of the main changes made to the integration scheme for members to peruse. And the third main strand of the report is the scheme of governance, which we're looking for approval. So every year we come to the board looking for approval of the revised scheme of governance, but members will see that this is clearly a much more in-depth and detailed change to the scheme of governance than in previous years. So there's a wide variety of changes made to the scheme of governance, and just to highlight a few of those, the standing orders have been updated substantially, and in particular the committees at the moment have some of their standing orders included in the terms of reference documents, and we're proposing to take those and move them all into one document just to make it easier to read and find the standing orders for every committee and the board. The terms of reference have been updated a bit and again have been moved all into one document, and that's again intended to make it easier to read and compare the terms of reference. And the roles and responsibilities protocol has been updated slightly, and I think probably the most major update there is the inclusion of the Chief Operating Officer role. And last but not least, the Code of Conduct has been updated slightly. This is really just fixing a couple of typos and other minor errors. It does not in any way actually affect the substantive Code of Conduct, and the Scottish Government have already said that they're quite happy with the proposed changes. And before I take questions, I'd just like to make it clear that although my name is down against this report and I'm doing the presentation, this is clearly the work of a great many officers, some of them who are in this meeting and some of them who are not in this meeting. Please don't take this as me taking credit for the entire thing myself, but I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you for that. And yeah, it's a huge piece of work, so well done to all the officers involved. So questions? Alison?
I have, and it's something we've spoken about on page 142 or 26 of the scheme of governance, is the carers expenses policy. I've incurred expenses over the last year. I've yet to be paid any expenses in over a year, even though I've claimed for them. I've never received a form. And also this expenses policy, we did have a discussion about it because when I first joined and we were assured that we would get a printed out copy of the pack in advance of every meeting, then we went into COVID and chaos, and we stopped getting printed out copies. So I've been incurring printing costs. Because COVID, you expect it to be short term, I didn't expect to have to incur printing costs for years. This is half of today's pack, which I was assured I'd get sent, but I wasn't, and this is what I printed out this morning. I ran out of paper. And the new policy, which I was told is going to be updated, does not include printing, and so I cannot claim printing costs, even though that was one of the things I was told I would be covered. I was told that we're going to change this and reconsider it, but then I discovered it last night in today's scheme of governance, which is getting approved today. So I need to raise it today because I don't think it's appropriate that carers have to incur costs for a year without being paid, and I also think it's not appropriate that carers should have to incur printing costs for years without getting recompense, and it's not in carers policy, which we're approving today, even though I was assured looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. You preempted one of the things I was going to raise. Yeah, I think the principle that we've got is that carer and user reps who give their time to IJB on a voluntary basis should in no way be out of pocket for anything. So we're very keen to do that. I think in terms of the discussions that we've been having around the fact that you weren't being reimbursed and preparation of the pack, there was a bit of overlap. Can officers come in maybe and comment on what we can do here?
I can come in. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I don't know the previous discussions that you've had, if we've had them with, etc. But really, if there's an issue, then let's resolve that as quickly as possible. If there's any concerns with the proposals in front of us, then we can open that up for discussion for the board to consider. But in terms of the specific issues that we come across, I'm more than happy to have a discussion in those, perhaps outside the meeting.
Yes, happy to do that outside the meeting. But for today, I think we need to explicitly include administrative costs includes things like printing, and also that we restated that we receive a printed out copy of the pack if we wish to have that. Because, as I say, that is half of today's pack, and I ran out of paper, and it's not just printing them; it's printers as well when you're starting to print this quantity.
Okay, so in terms of the recommendations and the policies set out in the paper, could we add in a phrase along the lines of other reasonable administrative expenses or words to that effect for approval today? Oh, Alison.
So, following the meeting with Alison last week, we agreed that we would undertake a review of the expenses policy, and I wonder if it's so that the policy that's there in the pack is the existing policy, and we've undertaken to do a review alongside the carers reps. So I don't know if we want to make any changes to that today, pending, the revised policy when it comes out. We would bring the revised policy back to IJB, and I'm assuming it would be included in the pack once it's updated.
I think we should put printing in today, because it is what we're approving today, and it, as you said before when I raised it before, you said that I couldn't claim printing because it wasn't in this policy, even though I was assured it would be covered previously.
I don't know. I was just going to say, based on what Alison was saying about the review, it might be appropriate to add a recommendation noting that there will be a review and that will come back to the IGB with that updated. I'll leave the board to discuss the printing aspect of that, because that clearly wouldn't fit well into that recommendation.
Would you be happy with that?
No, I'd like it to have printing put in it today.
Can I come in on this? I absolutely understand the requirement in the movers and people to have things printed off, but I do think that the review should take place in line with the carers policy, but also taking in line our approach to carbon zero, neutral, about printed costs and all of that, because we are more and more attempting to go paperless. So I do think that while I totally understand there might be individual circumstances, if we are putting this in and setting a precedence for printing and setting a precedence that we're always going to continue that there, I do wonder what that's doing. So I wonder whether it's the review of the policy that we can be quite explicit with its requirements for individual to meet individual needs, as opposed to it won't be an explicit, we will print off copies and move on to this.
Can I just say that Alison has been in touch with me since the general edition that asked for a printed copy to be sent. So it was in this instance a printed copy of all the 400 pages was posted out on Thursday. I understand that hasn't arrived yet, but obviously we can't allow for the Royal Mail postage delivery times. But it has been sent in this instance, but it would be nice for community services on cost as well.
I believe it was raised by Luann on the 21st of March that she raised asking that we get printed copies.
That's correct, and I had asked my line manager when it was being investigated, and there has been no outcome at the moment, but for this instance we would post a copy.
I think, sorry, if I come in, so that in our discussions with Alison, I think we can absolutely note that we're going to review the expenses policy. So we did know it didn't specifically talk about printing costs, but our view in our discussions was that we follow the principle that no one should be out of pocket, and we go on that at the moment. And if we need to put anything specific in around printing or any other costs, we do that as part of our formal review. But in the meantime, we would look at individual circumstances and honour any out-of-pocket expenses that were reasonable. So it's not you absolutely can't claim printing costs, it's just looking at each person's individual circumstances and going with that for now, which would allow you to get paper and those costs covered. That was our agreement. On the right, Alison, saying that last week.
I understood that I'd better claim printing.
Yes, that's what I mean.
This was also due to be reviewed annually, and it hasn't. The Carers Collaborative, which put together examples of stuff for carers reps around the country, include printing in their policy, in their outlines, and it was also explicitly stated when we took on the role. So I think while we can say we're going green and what have you, I think to suggest that I shouldn't print stuff out isn't really.
Can I come back on that? So I'm not for a moment suggesting you should print things out. What I'm asking is that the formal review, I think it was in response to your question that what you said was, I want printed added today, and you said that you didn't agree that I wasn't here. I think my response is that I would rather I would ask the chair and the board if we could wait for the formal review, because I think putting in printing explicitly without any kind of caveat to say individual needs will be met and where individuals require printed copies, because obviously there will be other formats. We may have carers reps who contribute original video, who require different methods, recorded, braille, anything like that. So I think we need to put in a clause that allows individuals' needs to be met. So it's not saying we shouldn't do that. What I'm cautioning against is putting explicitly that it's printing costs of this, because in some ways that would exclude others. It's more about recognising that there's individual needs. And I think that is more formal review of the policy rather than just an explicit today, please don't add in printing costs. So apologies if I didn't make that clear.
So Could I ask officers how quickly you can do the review? Or is that how long is a piece of string?
Yep, we should be able to do it quite quickly. We can, I mean, we were going to do it in conjunction with carers, and I was going to pass it to the carers strategy implementation group to have a look at. So probably need to discuss with them. I'm not sure we'd be able to do it for the 6th of June IJB. It might be the first one after recess, maybe the August meeting.
I guess we need to get it right.
Yeah.
So rushing it and maybe getting it wrong is probably worse than taking a wee bit more time and getting it right.
Yeah. We were also going to try and link it to the reference group, and the we've got lots of community representatives now participating in various consultation exercises, etc. So we wanted to try and widen it out and ensure that anybody who's engaging with the IGB and is potentially incurring expenses would be reimbursed. So it was going to be a pretty significant review.
Well, did you want to come in?
To me, that sounds sensible that we do it properly and do a full review, but in the meantime, our conversation absolutely still stands with Alison, but we take account individual need and we make sure we're not out of pocket in the meantime, so that this doesn't change our agreement with you last week.
Okay, are we happy with that?
Well, I do have my hand up, Chair.
Sorry, I think Martin's hand was up first. You're on mute, Martin.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got two queries. The first one is quite general, but I'll start with the second, which is about that issue of. I mean, it's already in the policy that volunteers should not be out of pocket; that there should be reimbursement. So I think that that could already be in place. I mean, I think adding granular detail to this document would start to become a problem, because we would be adding quite a considerable amount of extra operational information, which might detract. The point that I wanted to make about the document, I've read it through. It's really helpful, really reasonable. I think there are some really welcome updates to do with digital meetings and digital procedures, which I think is really helpful. But there's a section at the end on equalities for workshops, and I wasn't clear. Where is it? It's towards the end of the document, and I wasn't clear what that relates to. And I wondered if someone could explain it. It's a really helpful procedure. Beginning on page, where is it? Yeah, beginning on page 187, the Health Inequalities Impact Assessment. I wasn't sure how that's used.
Could one of the officers respond to that?
I can come in, Chair.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah, so the Health Inequalities Impact Assessment, yes, I can see that it's this is a template document, which is why it says workbook for workshop participants. This is effectively the inequality, well, it's a wider inequality impact assessment done on the the proposed changes to the primarily to the scheme of governance, just to highlight to members of the board any identified impacts on those with protected characteristics. It's similar to the integrated inequality assessments, which you might be familiar with from the council.
Right, thank you. Could you give an example when it would be used? So would it be used for meetings, workshops? I just wasn't clear on that.
It's primarily used, I believe, for when decisions are being made, and the idea is to identify where a decision might have an impact on any kind of group with a protected characteristic under the Equalities Act primarily, and it's just to highlight to members that.
I've got you. I do apologise. I don't think I understood entirely what it meant. I think the word workshop threw me, but I think you've made it clear. Thanks for that. That's really helpful. Sorry about that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Is that any more questions, Martin? Or so I've got Sandra next, and then I've got Caroline Howarth.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I have to say, it doesn't make for good listening about the what we have in place and what's happened. And I do think that that anybody who has any needs, I'm a bit of a hybrid user. I use a little bit of paper, but I use most things digitally, and everybody's got their own way of working. And I do think that there is a bit of an element of a hammer to crack a nut when discussing. We're going to speak for another few months about how to sort some of this. I think it is very easily sortable, and I think it should just be sorted right away.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Okay, so I will bring in Caroline. Caroline, I think you're on mute. I think there's some technical issues there, Caroline. Yeah, we'll leave that and we'll come back to you later if that's okay. Fine. Sorry. Yeah. Yes, it's been suggested. Could you pop a question in the chat? Yeah. Right. Okay. Right. Do we have any more questions or comments? I think on Sandra's point, I totally agree that we shouldn't have any of our carer or user reps should not be out of pocket at all, because I think we very strongly believe that they're giving their time voluntarily and they shouldn't be being penalised. I think also the fact that taking on board Sandra's perfectly valid point around needing to look at environmental impact of printing stuff. There are some people who just do need to have printed things. Certainly, I tend to look at most things electronically using the mod.gov application. But if you don't have the mod.gov application, look, I find it difficult to follow stuff if it's just a PDF or whatever. So I think I think it's perfectly valid to have printed copies for people. So if we can, I think the sense I'm getting from officers is that we do need to do a kind of proper review. That and again, I think Sandra made the point about you might need Braille, for example. But if we can do that, but give you the absolute undertaking that the expenses that you've already incurred will get sorted and you will be out of pocket if you do need to print anything, is that pending the full review. Would that be okay?
I would say I do try and be sensible about my printing, but big documents like this I find difficult to follow.
No, so do I, totally. As I say, it's great on the mod.gov app, but if I'm looking at something as a PDF, I find it a complete nightmare trying to follow it on screen.
Thank you.
Okay, any more on this one?
Caroline's questions in the chat.
Sorry.
Is my microphone working now?
Yes.
Oh,
Excellent.
I'm back. I logged out.
Let's
I
go.
logged out and in. I just wanted to check it was working in case I wanted to come back in again. My point's in the sidebar. It's just a mission, I thought.
Sorry, I've not got Teams open because I was looking on that.
Oh, sorry. So it's in Annex 3. The hosted services are listed. NHS, the Grampians, each IJB area, but Murray's are not listed, and that includes things like GMED and primary care and things. And I just wondered if that was an accidental omission or whether it just needed to be updated.
I think John is nodding, and it was an accidental omission, yeah?
Yes, that's right, Chair.
And we'll
added.
fix it in due course. Is that okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Graham, any more questions, comments?
I had another little one, but page 93, provision for people over 18. I wasn't quite sure how much work CAMS do with over 18-year-olds. It was listed under people over 18.
So I can answer that. My name's Amanda. I'm the service manager for CAMS and Grampians, so that it probably can be that I can answer that. At the moment, we've got up to the age of 18. However, there's provision for emerging pathways up to the age of 26 for those children and young people who wish to be seen, especially those that are care experienced in conflict with the law, learning disability. So over the next year or two, that will be expanding up to the age of 25 and stuff.
Right. I just wondered if it should have been in the under 18 section on it's page 93.
I think it's in both.
It was in another section as well, but I was just a little bit confused about it. But
I think it's in both. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for it. Okay, are we done with this one? In which case, can we agree the recommendations, which are on page 30? I won't read them all out because we've all got them. Seen them. So are we happy with the recommendations?
are we going to add the recommendation about reviewing the expenses as well?
I don't see why not. So just a note that we are reviewing it, yeah? Seems perfectly reasonable. Yeah. Are we agreed? Yeah. Excellent, thank you. Which then brings us on to item 6.1, which is the annual resilience report. And it's Martin. Alan. Just let Martin get round to the other end of the table.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide the annual assurance report on the IJB's resilience arrangements in fulfilment of its duties under the category, as a Category 1 responder under the Civil Contingency Act 2004. So the report provides an annual position statement on activity and preparedness in the areas set out in the Act. It includes details of further planned improvements to ensure that the IJB and the Health and Social Care Partnership are in as strong a position as possible to respond to emergencies and incidents affecting the public. Priority areas that have been identified and worked on during the year include the creation of an Aberdeen City Persons at Risk database, HARD, also work in relation to volunteers, community, business and individual resilience, and also a fair bit of work's been done on power resilience as well. The report outlines that the partnership has also been responding to a number of concurrent incidents throughout the year, which have been managed effectively through the partnership's emergency response structures, as detailed in the report. The report also outlines the training and exercising that have been undertaken during the year, and also the planned activities going forward for this year as well. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff in here, although we're doing it because it's a legal requirement, a lot of the stuff is stuff that we want to do anyway because it's the right thing to do. So does anyone have any questions on the report? Sandra. I've got Sandra first and then I saw Martin second. and then Alison. Sandra, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's a legacy hand, I'm afraid, Chair.
Oh, sorry. Not to worry, easily done. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. The Persons at Risk database, we're talking about emergency situations, so clearly there would be a need to respond very quickly, and in particular to target those who are the most vulnerable. So is it possible to have a little more information on that database? Is it something that's unique, that's been uniquely created? Is there sharing of information between organisations? Each partner will have its own separate database. It does seem quite considerably important to have an up-to-date, comprehensive database there. So just some further information would be much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you through you, Chair. So it isn't unique. My understanding is that all areas in Scotland are developing their own persons at risk database, albeit at different stages. We've been liaising with the Grampian Local Resilience Partnership, and then above that through the Scottish Government as well, in terms of the development of PARDs across Scotland. But from a Grampian point of view, given what occurred at the end of 2021 in Storm Arwen and then in storms at the start of 2022, there was a decision taken by Grampian Local Resilience Partnership to accelerate the development of the PARD. And so what was agreed was at the Grampian level, there's an agreement on the criteria of what constitutes a vulnerable person. So Aberdeen City, Aberdeen Shire and Murray are all working on the same criteria, albeit then they're working on individual systems in their own local authority area. So specifically in relation to Aberdeen City, in the last year we've moved from what was Care First, where all the kind of data of social work clients are kept, onto a new platform, Dynamic 365, D365. So there's a lot of work to make sure that the risks involved in moving that system were mitigated against and managed. So we've got an enhanced system in terms of what we've got in D365 in terms of the reports we can pull off in relation to vulnerable citizens in the city. We're working closely with colleagues in Aberdeen City Council to layer on extra sets of data. So there is a number of sets of data already available. So the local PARD group in the city is looking at developing that, layering on those sets of data to have a kind of an even further enhanced PARD. So we're expecting that to be progressed between now and winter 23-24. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. That does give reassurance, because one wouldn't want to have concerns about people being missed out and so forth. So clearly there's a comprehensive and integrated operation in place. Thanks for that.
Okay, Alison?
I think it's actually probably the same database which should be relevant, and that is has anything been done to identify people who are cared for where the carers, unpaid carers or paid carers it could be, are unable to get to those people? There's a lot of people who rely on unpaid carers, and in some of these circumstances they just won't be able to access and provide support and care for the person who they're normally providing care for and who relies very heavily on their care. And linked with that, how does the impact of is the consideration of the impact of power outages on the ability to contact services by phone when it's now all done via with the VoIP, and so it's all digital, which means that when power goes out, phones go out as well. I was just wondering how that's being considered.
So I think the answer to both the questions is probably going back to what I talked about under D365. There is that enhanced plan for each vulnerable person that social work have been working on, so that in the event of, so take an example of the flooding incident, I think it was in November 2022, social work were able to have an understanding of individual plans for people in the event of emergencies. So hopefully that kind of would cover the question that you raised there.
Yes, I suppose it's partly that it could be incidents in Aberdeenshire could prevent carers getting to people they care for in the city, and whether they're being identified as well, because they might not be engaging with social work services but very reliant on their carer.
Yeah, so I suppose if they were known to social work, then yes, that kind of plan is in place. If they're not known to social work, then I think that's something that we could take back into the working group just to sense check. Good.
Thanks.
My question maybe relates to that, Martin. Just in how we're developing, how we're engaging with communities in this, because I suppose that type of example would be neighbours looking out for people, and so how are we doing that, recognising the diversity of our communities, and yeah, that's been quite a difficult task. I would think. So just
Yeah.
to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah. So again, the partnership is working closely with colleagues in Aberdeen City Council who have been primarily pushing that kind of community approach across the city. So a number of couple of community resilience groups have been set up in the last year. So the Bridge of Dawn has been set up. We've been council have been engaging with community group down at Fitty as well, in terms of the tidal kind of flooding situation there. So it's a slow piece of work, but I think the more we get these community groups on board, then I think that people will see the benefit of it. We're also doing some work with health colleagues in terms of looking at the data in the previous cold snaps at the end of 2022 and start of 2023. So looking at certain postcodes in the city where there's been slips and trips, and just liaising between health, through the partnership and the council to kind of see if there's anything we could be doing to allow the communities in those settings to have access to the salt bins, etc., and have a kind of that kind of community resilience in place. So I think there's a lot more to be developed in that regard.
So I'm wondering if it's something that we should just be tying on to, like, all the conversations with community groups, just about, because it will be the community members that step up and do stuff in an emergency. So almost doing it not as a separate piece of work, but just thinking through ACRO how we support local community groups, but we've got the right people connected in. So
yeah, and just maybe just a little bit more detail on that. We're currently obviously working with ACFO, but also looking at the British Red Cross have got a community reserve volunteer programme. So we're looking at trying to encourage those volunteers who have volunteered through the pandemic to see if they're still interested in volunteering. We're suggesting that might be quite an easier way of managing the volunteers. So we're liaising with the British Red Cross on that. So we need to get that message out there to volunteers and see if they still want to do that.
thanks, Martin.
Thanks. Any more questions on this one? No. Okay. So can we agree the recommendation, which is just for noting, which then brings us on to the next item, 6.2, which is the equality outcomes and mainstreaming framework. I think it's Alison.
It is, thank you. So the report in front of you has 3 appendices. The first is the biennial progress report against our existing equality outcomes. IGB may recall we agreed these outcomes for 4 years in May 2021, and we are obliged to produce a report on progress against these every 2 years. So Appendix A contains the progress report on the equality outcomes that are existing. But what we did when we were pulling the progress report together, together with some information and advice that we got from the Equality and Human Rights Commission. We took the opportunity to review the equality outcomes that we had. We noticed when we were pulling the progress report together that we probably had been quite ambitious in what we did, or the commitments that we made there. And of course, these equality outcomes were devised prior to us having our detailed delivery plan that sits alongside our strategic plan. So we have had a good look at our equality outcomes, and we've linked it more closely to the delivery plan. So what you have in front of you is the progress report for the last 2 years on the existing outcomes, and the proposed revised outcomes, which we're suggesting we just have for the next 2 years, because that is also in line with when we'll be due to bring forward a revised strategic plan. So what we would plan to do is link the two going forward. In addition, we have also produced guidance on assessing the impact of policy and practices, and that's really been devised over the past couple of years' experience of working with the existing system. We've taken on board comments from officers who have been working with the impact assessments, and we've tried to take all of that into account and put it all together in one pack for guidance for officers who will be undertaking the impact assessment. So we've tried to streamline the templates that we were using and make it easier and clearer for officers to understand what their responsibility is. And I think that's probably all I want to say.
Thanks, Alison. Any questions or comments?
Yeah.
Alison?
All right, a couple of things. One, you state it's no need to cover all groups with protected characteristics. There's something, I've seen this before. I'd seen comments of people with protected characteristics and all groups with protected characteristics. We've all have protected characteristics, so all groups with protected characteristics is everyone. But I was just wondering why you didn't feel it necessary to cover all protected characteristics. And then I had another question on page 226, 1.3, which is all premises that Aberdeen Health and Social Care Partnership work out of or deliver services have been collaboratively reviewed in terms of location, ramped access, signage and transportation links. And you say, as Aberdeen, IGB does not have sole responsibility for access to the premises, we shouldn't do it because it's out of our remit. We might not have responsibility of the premises, but we do have to make sure the services we deliver are accessible to people. So if the premises isn't accessible, we should move premises if we cannot change the premises. So I wasn't quite happy with saying we're not responsible for the premises and therefore we're not going to ensure that all premises are accessible.
Yeah.
Come back in that?
So on the first one, sorry, that was why not all protected characteristics? Yeah. So that was actually, so what that is when we choose our equality outcomes, we don't have to have an equality outcome for each protected characteristics. What the Equality and Human Rights Commission said was, when they reviewed the equality outcomes for all the IGBs, they said that a common mistake was that IGBs tried to have at least one equality outcome for each protected characteristic that was listed. So what that means, what the comment in the paper means, is that is not a requirement. We decide which equality outcomes we want to have, and we don't have to have one for each. that mentions each.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not saying that we don't have to cover each.
No,
no,
sorry.
Yeah.
It's probably badly worded. And the other one, we're not saying that one. It's not about saying that we don't have that responsibility for access. That's not what that means. What that comment means is that we're not going to take forward that equality outcome into our revised outcomes, because we don't have sole responsibility over, we're not in total control of the buildings and what the buildings look like. So and how they're configured. We can have some influence in it, but we don't have total control over it. So what that comment is meaning is that we're not proposing to take that particular outcome forward into our revised outcomes.
Sorry, I get that. I was just thinking that it was not appropriate to drop it, because I was thinking that we should make sure all premises that we deliver services from are accessible in terms of location, ramp access, signage and transportation, whether we can make a change to the building or whether we have to consider the location of the service.
Yeah, we still have an accessibility outcome. We just don't have it specifically in terms of the building.
Okay, is that okay? So Sandra's hand.
Chair, to be honest, I was going to bring up exactly the same point that Alison brought up, and I just wanted to ask on the back of the answers, how do we evaluate or how do we monitor that we are doing it right if we don't have this in our matrix for this particular aspect of our work?
So we will have we do have a equality outcome for accessibility. So we will be looking at that, and we will be reporting back on it. It's not as specific as our previous equality outcome was.
Thank you. And where would I see that if I wanted to follow up on it? Where would I look?
So we will. We're still obliged to bring forward reports on. I think we said we would report to IJB on an annual basis, but we have to report statutory. We have a statutory obligation to produce a report on a biannual basis.
Thank you.
Is that okay, Sandra? Oh, you got follow-ups?
I think so. I'm not totally convinced. I understand, but I'll maybe have to dig a little deeper on my side of trench.
Okay. Alan, Luann?
Thanks. And maybe it kind of leads on from Sandra's question there. I read the Equality and Human Rights Commission input as really helpful in helping us focus on the areas where we've got greatest inequalities, and I think that's a really good advice to be given from fresh eyes from out with. I just wondered, Alison, does that affect our delivery plan at all? Does it change anything that we're planning to do? And for me, just reading this, there's just such a lot in it. I wondered if there's a way of us seeing that in a flash report or something that just highlights, here's our focus, these are the bits that we're really putting effort and energy into this year, and this is what we'll see as a result of that. So that's kind of a comment.
So it doesn't change our delivery plan, because in actual fact the revised outcomes were really easy to write because our delivery plan is already has quite a strong equality focus. So what you'll see, the actions underneath each of the equality outcomes more or less mirror what we've said we are going to do in our delivery plan. So it won't change. It won't change anything that way. But as I said, when we're writing that, I've coincided the timing of revising the equality outcomes the next time and the strategic plan. They'll both coincide, so we'll do it both at the same time. Yeah. So that they'll completely mirror.
And in terms of us just seeing what we're focusing on. Will that come through in our templates, just so that it's easy for us to see and understand? Because there's obviously so much going on.
Yeah, we'll have a look and see what we can do about reporting. But as you say, there is a lot of information there, so it's which bits that you pick out. But we could probably look at something along the BRAG status that we use for the reporting on the projects in the delivery plan. So we just give you a BRAG status rating, so that blue is completed, red, amber, green, as you would normally expect. So we can maybe look at something like that to do a BRAG status as to how each equality outcome is performing.
Okay.
With maybe a little bit of text for each outcome as opposed to each of the individual actions.
That would be useful. Thank you.
Thanks. Sandra, you've got your hand. Is that a legacy hand, or have you got further questions?
Chair, I was just going to try to offer some additional assurance to the question about accessibility of our buildings, and really just a couple of brief points, just wearing my business support hat that Martin and I sort of share. I think a couple of things to add. One would be, we have a business support team that manage all our buildings, whether we own them or work in them, and we're regularly looking across all those buildings in terms of accessibility and any other health and safety issues. And also both the partnership and NHSG and ACC have a pretty regular kind of walk around schedule, which includes staff reps and other health and safety reps. So I guess what I'm saying is I'd be pretty confident any accessibility issues would be immediately picked up. The point was raised about location, and I guess that's slightly more subjective, because people might say that location is not accessible to me, and that might mean different things to different people. But I would be pretty confident that from a business support point of view, we'd be picking up any inaccessibility issues, or would be happy to hear of any other issues around accessibility in any buildings that we maybe need to have another look at.
Thanks, Annie. That's really helpful. Any further questions, comments? Nope, not seeing any. In which case, can we look at the recommendations on pages 217, 218? So are we happy to approve the progress report and have it published? Are we happy to approve the revised guidance and the revised outcomes of the mainstreaming framework? Yep, seeing nods.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. That brings us on to 6.3, which is a report on hosted services for noting. It's Alison again.
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, as you're aware, there are various hosted services across Grampian. You'll see on the report itself, 3.1, these services are listed and which Health and Social Care Partnership hosts them, and approximately the budget for each of those. Obviously, there's an accountability and transparency consideration here, as each IJB is hosting each of the services. They're being provided for the whole of Grampian. So in order to try and give visibility to these services and what's happening, and give assurance, I guess, to each of the IJBs as to how the services are performing, what their current issues are, etc. It was agreed that we would report on each of the services to each of the IJBs. So there was a Aberdeen Shire meeting in March. They're coming here today, and they'll be going to Murray IJB as well. So the appendices are there for the hosted services. There's detail in each of the appendices. I will probably not be able to answer all of the questions on each of the hosted services, but we do have colleagues from each of these services around the table today, if IJB have any questions of them.
Thank you for that, Alison. Any questions, comments? Sandra?
Thank you, Chair. It's around the service level agreements that are mentioned on page 2861. And I just wondered if there had been any progress made in developing those, and you know, what sort of timescale are we looking at here? Is it weeks, or well, it says that's happened in recent months, but how soon would we have those in place?
So the plans for the SLAs is that we will bring them to the IJBs around about the budget setting time. So the idea of the SLAs is to ensure that all the IJBs are comfortable with the services that are being provided, and that perhaps, you know, budget setting time is the time to lay out that information, and if any of the IJBs want any changes to the services, then obviously the budget might need to change as well. So that's the time scale that will bring the SLAs around about the time that the IJB are agreeing the budget.
Thank you for that. We've just had a budget process, so I'm assuming that'll be, you know, almost a year until they're seen.
Yes, it will be roughly at that time scale, yes. But each of the services are working on the SLAs at the minute.
Okay, any more questions or comments? Not seeing any hands, so can we note the sorry,
Kim's hands up online.
Who's on? Was it Kim? Kim, sorry,
Yeah,
didn't spot
yes,
your hand.
Chair. Apologies, it was a reluctant hand. I don't know what the word is. Sorry. Could I just ask something about the work that's sort of planned for Dr. Gray's, and I guess some timescales around that. I'm just wondering about the sort of equity for patients who would be placed up on Gray's compared to Cornhill, with it being the remaining site that hasn't been upgraded, and how that's kind of been managed, just roughly, and then what's the rough timescales around that, if we know.
Yes.
Do we know?
Sandra? Yeah.
Come in and help that there. There's work that's been going on at Dr. Gray's with the mental health services in particular. Is that what you're asking, Kim? Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not ligature. Yeah. So there's work being options appraisals that are being done at the moment. There's a small group. There's some further work to be done on that. And part of that is looking at how we'll be able to decant, and there's also an MRI scanner that's getting put at Dr. Gray's as well. So you'll be aware that there's a significant number of people within Ward 4 at Dr. Gray's, and aware of how we can decant them, particularly given the ongoing impact from Cornhill, which you'll be aware of is that we've not been able to open the 2 ligature wards there. So all of that's tied in. So there was a request that went back and has been taken forward through the Chief Exec's team at NHS Grampian, is to have a look at how and what other options are available rather than just impacting on Cornhill directly with Dr. Gray's. So the timeframes I've been asked, I think the next, that was just discussed with the Chief Exec's team this morning, and Simon said that they're waiting for a further people to come back because of some updated issues for our next Chief Exec's team on 1 after. So apologies, I'm not more explicit. I was looking out for me at that time.
Okay. So,
So I've got a few questions, one for each IJB. I thought that would be fair. So the first one, it's really good to hear about the sexual health services. It feels very familiar because it already goes through our governance system in Aberdeen. Sandy, I was interested to saw that we're doing a population needs assessment coming up, and I'm really interested in how we're working with different parts of our communities to get their views on addressing any barriers to engagement with the service. We're interested to hear if there's a plan for engagement with our communities.
Thank you, Chair. I maybe ask Phil Mackey to come in. Phil, because Phil's going to be leading that piece of work and knows more than me about it.
Thank you, Sandy. We are currently working through the final method that we'll adopt beyond data handling. So I will talk with my colleague who is going to be running that part of the service, that needs assessment with the service, to ensure that we get differing community views reflected in that work. What might be simpler is if I check that and provide a note for inclusion in the minute after this meeting.
Yeah, Phil, I'm happy to connect with you. I think there's different ways of looking at it, and I'm really interested in how we engage our citizens in actually analysing research we do. So not just see them as the group that we're analysing, but actually get their views on how do they interpret the data in front of us, because they might have different conclusions to us. And I know that community planning are doing some interesting work with citizens researchers. So I'll maybe come offline, Phil, and share some stuff with you.
That would be incredibly helpful. I apologise that I misinterpreted what you were actually saying there. I'm very interested in this whole question about how different groups interpret evidence that's in front of them. So I would be very interested to follow that through with you.
But my question was broad, so that's fine. Thank you, Phil. So my second question is about GMEDs, and I'm seeing that there's looking at improvement and redesign of GMEDs. I just wondered how much scope we have to do that on a local basis, or are we really constrained by Scottish Government restrictions and guidance about what GMED is able to do? I don't know if anybody can answer that question.
So with the question for the GMED, the project that's been funded in the take us through the winter monies, which traditionally called winter monies, and that's looking at there is work that's ongoing to look at how on a pan-campaign basis we can start to look at kind of care of GMED and what the whole of that looks like. So and bearing in mind in line with the MOU, the memorandum of understanding with the GMS contract and all of that, so we're engaging with primary care leads and that's it's very good work, but just to say it's been looked at, but we can establish that and much more looking at pan-campaign basis as opposed to just funding things in local options. It's good.
And then my final question is about HMP Grampian, and just really thoughtful that a high proportion of people in HMP Grampian will come back to Aberdeen City. So just wanted assurance about the joined upness of planning for people coming home, so that we're doing that in a way that minimises risk to them on release.
Have we got someone who can?
Yes. Thanks, Luann. I mean, I can speak from a healthcare kind of perspective in relation to that kind of through care kind of element. So we do have very kind of close contacts with colleagues in the city, specifically at the kind of timber market, so that we're ensuring you know, that kind of continuity and that kind of access to kind of through care services kind of from that kind of point of view. There's also a lot of work goes on kind of within HMP Grampian roundabout. I know there's kind of weekly kind of case conference kind of meetings, which kind of focuses on that kind of element of kind of through care, that all partners are kind of around the table for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lan. Sandra, did you want to come in? Legacy hand, don't worry. Any more comments, questions? In which case, can we move to the recommendation, which is just to note the report, and apologies for leaping to the recommendations before I realised people had questions. Are we okay to note it?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. That brings us on to 6.4, which is the supplementary procurement work plan. Just a kind of wee reminder on this one that we've got exempt appendices. So if we are asking questions, can we make sure that we don't stray into the exempt business, but keep it to the public stuff. And I think Neil Stevenson is the report author, so I'll bring in Neil to steer us through this one, please.
Yeah, good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time. So yes, we have today to present one business case for the provision of advocacy services across Aberdeen City, which is a statutory requirement for us to do so. And following a pin that we did in January, we're asking approval to go to tender later on in the year for the services. I'm happy to answer any questions. The one question we received in the consultation process was around whether children were included here. And just to be clear and transparent, that children, there is provision, or there will be provision, or there is provision under the current contract, and there will be provision going forward for children who are detained under the Mental Health Act to receive services under this contract. And currently, Children's Services, I believe, still commission another provider for advocacy services. So I don't really have anything else really to add, Chair. But I'm obviously happy to answer any questions and can give reassurances that the appropriate monitoring and ethical commissioning will be done around this particular piece of work, if approved.
Thanks, Neil. Any questions for Neil on this one? Alison?
Sorry, could you, and you mentioned children, could you just go over again what, in terms of advocacy services, are available for children? I think particularly with UNCRC, that's been rolled out, that's sort of particularly, I think, important.
Thanks. I'm afraid I probably have to get back to you on the actual specifics of that, because I'm not in a position to probably say anything on that today, but I will certainly get back to you with specific details. Is that, hopefully that's acceptable. I don't believe Catherine is here in the meeting with me this morning, who would have some more information on that.
Yes, that'll be good.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Luann?
Thanks. Neil, my question's just about how we've involved service users in the design of this specification, and great to hear how it's changed, what's coming forward in the specification, if there's anything that's specifically been changed as a result of involving service users.
Yeah, in terms of the consultation, the extensive work obviously went on around that. In terms of the actual changes to provision carried out, there will be changes to the responsibilities in relation to carers legislation. There will be changes in relation to support of large-scale investigations with adult support and protection for adults with incapacity in the case conferences. Activity linked to the medical assessment treatment, the MAT, standards for Scotland to enable the consistent delivery of safe, accessible and high quality drug treatment and support. So there'll be changes in the specification around those specific areas. And of course, it will take into account any other changes in legislation and practice.
Okay. Any more comments, questions? Not seeing any hands. In which case, can we approve going out to tender as per the recommendations on page 310?
Okay.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Which brings us on to 7.1, which is the suicide prevention strategy. I'm looking for Jenny to introduce this one, is it?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll introduce this paper on behalf of Mental Health and Learning Disability Services. So the paper in front of you is for noting in terms of recommendations, and also to instruct the Chief Officer to bring back an annual report. on the implementation of the national Creating Hope, which is suicide prevention strategy and action plan on a local basis. So we've been working together collectively with colleagues in Aberdeenshire and Moray to produce pan-Grampian approach to offering improvements around suicide prevention, and also looking at kind of how we operationally collect data, how we use that data to inform service provision, and also specifically within Aberdeen City, looking at an operational group which will come together, look at the more geography-specific needs of City in relation to that pan-Grampian approach, but following the vision and principles of the national strategy and implementing that locally. Myself and Jenny are happy to take any questions that people would have on that strategy, and if we can answer them today, we will do, and if not, we can always come back with comments.
Thanks, Jenny. Comments, questions? Martin?
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a really welcome report. It's good to see that it's very wide-ranging and comprehensive in its outlook. There's a lot of really helpful interventions. The preventative agenda is very, very clearly set out there, and I think that the gathering and the use and the analysis of data is really crucial in all of this. So I think that subgroup that was mentioned, that's going to have a really important part to play in actioning this report. There's mention of loss of data. I don't know how important that is. It's just to find out a little more information on how information will be gathered and used to help to action this program. Just a little bit more detail on how that will be done would be quite helpful, I think.
So through yourself, Chair, we will be working with colleagues within the Health Intelligence team and obviously with Public Health Scotland to better understand specific trends that apply both in a national and local setting around causes of suicide, and also looking at engagement with our provider, third sector colleagues, particularly with SAMH, who have recently been awarded a contract to act as a strategic partner across Grampian around suicide prevention. So to really understand and bring to light those kind of trends, the things that we can action locally and make improvements on, but also things nationally that may have an impact. Obviously, people will be aware of the impact of the cost of living crisis and how that's affecting people, but we may have specific concerns in the North East, and particularly in Aberdeen, that we would like to consider potentially around perhaps people who've been made redundant through oil and gas sector, and maybe people who we wouldn't traditionally have expected to potentially have thoughts of completing suicide. It's obviously a very emotive kind of topic, and we want to work with all of our kind of partners, those who have experience of supporting individuals, but also families who've potentially lost loved ones as well, and collect that data through that operational group to really inform that local planning and influence nationally where possible.
Yeah, thanks for that response. I think that inevitably there will be variations in local areas depending on specific circumstances. For example, you mentioned there our employment movements. But I think that the value of this approach is that everybody's working together. I think that is really crucial. That is really helpful. I mean, that gives a lot of reassurance. So many thanks, and I wish you all the best at every best wish with what you're doing. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I think Sandra and then Alison.
Thank you for the report, and it is reassuring to see the 10-year strategy and all that's being done, because let's face it, there has always been a focus on suicide, and having worked in the oil and gas industry for over 30 years, it was always something that was very close to our thoughts, not just for redundancy, but for offshore working. And of course, that might not be always concentrated in our particular geographical area here in the northeast, because many of those workers do live in other parts of of Scotland and of the UK and the world, actually. But so it is good to see. I just wondered how and if the nature of social media, which is very much prevalent in our lives today, which wasn't there 10 20, 30 years ago, comes into the thinking when looking at suicide prevention going forward.
So again, through yourself, Chair, I probably can't comment specifically on the trends around social media. However, as part of the national strategy and also that much more local implementation, use of social media is a key factor, both in terms of how that can obviously impact people, often younger people, in terms of kind of their exposure to social media, but also, I guess, the advantages of being able to promote ways of kind of supporting people, different interventions, and being able to provide a listening ear to people through that kind of concept of social media is something that also needs to be taken advantage of. So that would all be considered within that pan-Grampian approach that we're looking at.
And I guess following on from that, through you, Chair, there is that partnership approach as well that I certainly know from being a representative in the city centre ward, that there are hotspots and issues that are always being looked at across the NHS and the council and Police Scotland and Fire and Rescue and all the rest, third sector organisations too. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct, and I think potentially Angela may want to come in to maybe highlight some of the work that she's been part of, both in locally and in the national kind of forums around suicide prevention. But this is very closely linked to all of our different strategies and working relationships with a variety of partners within community planning and further afield. It's not something just for the IGB to hold and to be responsible for. It's everyone's responsibility, because we will all be touched by this subject matter at some point in our lives.
Thank you.
Thanks. Alison?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to come in, Angela?
Thank you, Councillor Cook. It was just to come back on the points raised by Councillor MacDonald in relation to social media. The National Suicide Leadership Group, Councillor MacDonald's been very focused on the risk of harm because of online activity, in particular the access to the means with which you can access. And you'll be aware that the UK government, of course, has been working on its online harms bill as well. So there's certainly a lot of attempt at the national level to engage around how we can ensure all the platform providers take a more responsible approach to the material that is available online. And of course, as you'll be familiar with the personal and social education curriculum that council colleagues run through the education system, we're trying to make sure that children in particular understand the risks of harm to them and inappropriate access of materials online. So there is, and I think Jenny's quite right to say, some of this work needs to be progressed at a national level. We'll do our utmost at a local level to make sure there's attention on it. There are also, again, responsibilities on the media around how the media report incidents of suicides, and again, the National Suicide Leadership Group's been just looking to underscore that it's really important that there's responsible reporting of suicide and the risk of harm as well. So again, at a local level, we'll certainly be progressing that. And the only other thing I was going to add, Councillor Cook, with your indulgence, was just around lived experience. I'm not sure we've maybe put enough into the paper around ensuring that we are accessing the voice of lived experience, both in terms of those who've attempted suicide, but also in terms of their families as well. So again, there's a national lived experience panel that's been established, and through our partnership, we're looking to just refresh that historical panel that we had within the city and again across Grampian as well. So we'll ensure that we constantly get the lived experience voice, as I say, both from those who attempt suicide, but also importantly from their families as well. But Councillor MacDonald, happy to give you more detail offline if you'd like to know more about the work of the National Suicide Leadership Group. Thank you, Councillor Cook.
Thanks, Angela. That was really helpful. I can see Paul had his hand up, but I think I was going to bring Alison next.
Okay, thank you. I wonder, just as an extra point, before Angela said that, I just wonder about the term lived experience in relation to suicide prevention. It sounds a little bit, I don't know. Yes, but my point was, I noticed that it's acknowledged that this does have an impact just as a carer on unpaid carers, though it says no direct unpaid carers implications. I think that's not true. I think where you're caring, it's not, I've fortunately not had direct involvement in this, but I've seen other people, and where you're caring for somebody who is suicidal, any services or lack of services to that person has a very big direct impact on the carer. Who I've seen people trying to go weeks without sleep because they fear going to sleep what their person they cared for will do, so it's just how carers are brought into this picture of how support is provided for these individuals, both in terms of what support they can provide the individual and also support for the carer. I think they've got to be part of that system around the individual, but also having support in their own right.
Through yourself, Chair, I'm happy to come in on the kind of concept of lived and living experience. So I guess those terminologies are used nationally, but we do understand that perhaps that maybe doesn't quite summarise the experiences that people may have around suicide. It's very important that carers and family members are a real asset in terms of us understanding how we can best support people and how ultimately we can prevent deaths from suicide locally and contribute obviously nationally to that agenda. SAMH as that strategic partner within the pan-Grampian approach will have a key role around the voice of those with experience and with connection, if you like, into this topic. But also we will look in that specific city operational group as to how we best link in with those that we can kind of target in our communities, different groups that may have experience, and that would most certainly include carers and family members.
Thanks for that, Jay. Paul?
No, I didn't.
Paul Mitchell, you got your hand up?
No,
yes.
Not me.
I think
it's not me.
You've got your hand up.
Oh, sorry.
It's I feel that.
Right. Sorry, Paul. This is kind of an issue with the screen, so. Right, Christian.
Yes, if I can come before Angela, because I think Angela did speak about it and the discussion around the living experience, which I like the term. I like the term living experience, which is quite important. But I just wonder, when we talked about living experience and we talk about the families who have been affected, have we thought about maybe make them participate to the new Aberdeen Cities group, as opposed to you know, is there a way that we might be able to include them in that subgroup?
Through yourself, Chair. We're more than happy to look at the membership of the local Aberdeen City group. I don't think I can answer specifically whether we could. I don't know if there's maybe groups that represent families and carers, or whether that would be specific families and carers with experience around this topic. But that's certainly something we can take on board in looking at that local group and how it's constructed.
Thank you. Thanks. And then, Angela, did you want to come back in?
Thank you. Just in response to Councillor Allard's point, and then I'll come back to Alison's point, if I may. In terms of, again, the National Suicide Leadership Group, Councillor Allard has been undertaking some pilots around what a bereavement support service to families who are affected by suicide could look and feel like. The pilot's underway, it's being evaluated. I think actually one of our own local third sector partners are involved in that national pilot. The hope is that potentially, subject to the evaluation and funding, that support system could be rolled out right across Scotland. So just building on Jenny's comments, that actually we could find a systematic way to have that support, because again the data reveals that where there's an incidence of suicide in a family, then it can increase the prevalence of that in the rest of the family as well. So that immediate support to families is going to be critical. So I think it'll be important for us to keep tracking that development at the national level, and then subject to funding, then look to roll that out. Coming back to Alison's point about carer rep, and absolutely accept the heightened risk of suicide within the structures of carers, and I wonder, Alison, if we can pick offline with you an appropriate carer rep to join the lived experience panel that we've got at a local level. There may already be people who are carers that are in that panel, but if not, we can look to maybe get a very deliberate rep from carers to join that group. As you know, the biggest prevalence around suicide is, and no offence to the middle-aged men on this call, but that's where our systematic issue lies, and they are generally individuals who are not in contact with any service at all. And so there's a real focus on obviously that group, but that's not to say that there are not other at-risk groups. And again, Councillor MacDonald's point earlier on about social media, and again we're seeing through analysis of data for children in the city the level of self-harming that's going on across children in particular, and again that can tend to be a kind of predictor of a heightened suicide risk going forward as well. So there are no shortage of at-risk groups. We need to make sure that our focus are on those specifically that are revealing themselves within the city, and make sure we've got that focus. But by all means, happy to pick up offline trying to get a carer rep, and happy to come back at a future date, I guess, with the results from the national evaluation of that bereavement support service, to see if that's something that we can, as a local system, roll out to families here in Aberdeen. Thank you, Councillor Cook.
Thanks, Angela. That was very helpful. Luann?
Yeah, thanks, John. Sorry. I mean, I think it's a good idea to have different, like a carer rep on the group, but for me, it's far more important that we're connecting in with the third sector and the community groups that already exist, so that we're not seeing one person as the person that speaks for all people's diverse experiences. And I was trying to Google just now, I'm pretty sure there's a group that's for parents who've lost their children and young people as a result of drug and alcohol, that operates in Aberdeen City. So it would be people like that would be really important to connect with, and get, connect with their group and go to where they're at, rather than expecting people always to come to us, if that makes sense. But happy to share those contacts, Jenny, if you don't have them.
Thanks. Well, any more comments, questions? Phil.
Thank you very much. I've been listening to the conversation quite carefully, and I think there's a a word that keeps recurring to me when we're exploring this, and that's contribution. I think this is an area where very often we see suicide and suicide prevention as an area of work isolated from others. And I think what's been coming through this conversation, and an important way of looking at this, is to understand the contribution towards suicide prevention, and other forms of serious self-harm that can actually be explored in a preventative way, where other services, other points of contact, other ways of looking at the world are contributing, as I think Angela has mentioned very clearly. The linkage is actually about how we ensure that if there are contributions to be made, they happen, and we understand how to make sure those are clearly reported and sustained. So I will be certainly looking through the next year very carefully at looking not only at ADPs, looking at mental health in children, it's an area under the Children's Services Plan that I have some responsibility now for, and a range of other preventative areas to ask that question. What is that contribution? Are we making that contribution meaningful? Can we articulate how that contributes towards suicide and suicide reduction and prevention? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Phil. Any more questions, comments? Not seeing any hands. Actually, I've got one. Jenny, you mentioned the role of the media in terms of how suicide can be portrayed. There's a risk, and you read sometimes of it being glamorized, and you see people, younger people in particular, looking at websites that are about suicide, and that's obviously a bad thing. Some media coverage, though, can be quite helpful, I think, in terms of alerting people to look for the signs of someone who might be suicidal. I'm just wondering what kind of contact we have in an ongoing basis with local media, EE, P&J, Original, North Sound, etc.
Thanks, Chair. So I probably can't comment exactly on the links that we have in terms of specifically within that group, but we obviously have broad links organisationally with those media outlets, and certainly there have been a lot of national campaigns that we could maybe take a local spin on and look locally at what we should do together, and that comes back to Phil's point around actually bringing this into other agendas, to really be able to capture maybe those kind of populations that we're not regularly connected with in terms of our service delivery models that we have. So there are different ways that we can look at using the media, and I'm sure that I see that Graham has popped up his hand. Graham would be crucial in how we would interact with the media, and what we can do is link with Graham and other relevant colleagues in both the kind of operational groups that we have, but also that strategic pan-Grampian approach, because I think it's important where possible that we're really consistent in our messaging, but we take that local spin where that's really important around certain trends or ways to connect, and that it's also really important to include the relevant population groups, if you like, within those conversations, as in how to engage with young people, what's the best medium to use around that. It isn't necessarily print media anymore, it's things like much more innovative kind of tools such as video media and other forms of social media. So we would definitely want to progress with that where possible, and we'll certainly link in with Graham and colleagues in this work.
Thanks, Jenny. And you said that Graham's got his hand up?
Yes, Chair. Just to chip in there, I think maybe going back historically, maybe as long as, I don't know, 15 years ago, you might have got a pretty raw deal in terms of quote unquote suicide stories in the media. But I think Well, I know for a fact over the last several years, the local media anyway, I can't speak for the likes of The Sun and other national tabloids, but certainly the local media have taken incredibly sensitive approach to suicide stories and tend not to cover them as news stories as such. There's been a much greater appetite for covering suicide as an issue, and in a very positive and constructive manner. I know of a number of journalists who take a particular interest in this issue, not least our very own Fiona Stalker of the BBC, who's done several sensitive pieces on suicide and suicide prevention from a number of different angles. So that's my pitch for the media.
Thanks, Graham. I think I'd agree with you that the coverage is now more sensitive than it was a few years past. Okay, have we got any more questions, comments? Oh, sorry, Angela. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. I thought your question was more around how we equip people to have a conversation about friends, families, colleagues, mental health, in order that that we can help to prevent suicide. I thought that's what your specific question was, and I think Jenny's right around probably what we've all done as public sector bodies with our own workforces. I know that from an ACC perspective, we've done a huge amount around how to have that conversation if you think a colleague, a friend or a family may be at risk of attempting suicide. This is kind of difficult space to be in for anybody. I think as public partners, we're probably all doing that within our own organisation. I think the challenge you're giving us is how we support the whole of community, including businesses, and Councillor MacDonald referenced the work that she did as an employer. So there are a suite of products, training products and so on that can be shared with employers to support employers and employees to do that with one another. I think your challenge is then how we get that into the public domain so that everybody knows around how to use it. And I guess, again, coming back to the vast majority of attempts at suicide are not attempted within acute settings, whether that's prison or hospital. They're in community settings. So any one of us could come across a member of the public attempting suicide, and of course blue light services often are the first ones on a site as well. So I think you are giving us a challenge around how we take this into the public domain, but more than just the broadness of the issue, being able to talk about mental health, what to do in the event that you do come across somebody who's attempting suicide. So again, Councillor Cook, I'm happy to take that back into the structures that we've got to make sure we focus on how we support community and business to have these conversations, to be able to do the early intervention when we may come across somebody who's attempting, or at the very least to try and prevent it in the first place. So a helpful challenge from you. Happy to take that into the respective groups that we've got to make sure we keep thinking about the broader population and how the broader population are a critical part of the prevention of suicide. So thank you for raising that.
No, thanks, Angela. I think that's the point well made. And I know within Aberdeen City Council, quite often you'll get an email from someone, and at the bottom of the signature it'll say, "I'm a mental health first aider," which I think is a good thing. And we need to get people talking more about mental health issues without fear of stigma. But thank you for that. Any more comments, questions? Nope. In which case, can we note progress and ask for an annual update? Can we agree on that? Okay. I now make it 8 minutes past 12. So I said I'd have a wee comfort break at about 11:45, but we kind of went a little bit long. But if we could take a 10-minute comfort break now, and maybe reconvene at 12:20, if that's okay with folk, just to give everybody a wee rest. Okay, thanks.
Well done, John. You've got a wag out row with us.
Years ago. Now. That's then so. Absolutely.
In the room there. Kick off again. Right, okay, welcome back all. We've worked out why I keep calling people in, because I think they've got their hand raised. It's just the big screen just tells you that someone has got their hand raised. So I've now got my head around that. So sorry about the confusion earlier. So if we can go into item 7.2, which is the paper on prevention and early intervention. This actually is I was keen to bring this paper to IJB. It was a paper that we had at council at the beginning of March, and I just thought it was interesting. So we can hand over to Alison.
Thank you. I think you've stolen my thunder a little bit there, but never mind. So absolutely, we're asked to bring this paper, and the appendix is actually the paper that went to Aberdeen City Council meeting, and it explains obviously our the intention to focus more on prevention and early intervention. And it describes a tiered model. You'll see the coloured triangle on the report, and on both reports, the cover report and the report that went to council. 3 tiers, tier 3 being response, tier 2 being early intervention, and tier 1 being prevention. And obviously the intention is that to try and have as much of our activity as possible in the prevention tier, because that's the only way that we will have sustainable services for the future. So it was really just to bring attention to the paper and the content of the paper that went to Aberdeen City Council, but also to highlight what we plan to do about it. You'll see that there is a recommendation in the report that the Chief Officer of the partnership includes a tiered analysis on annual reporting against the Health and Social Care Partnership Strategic Plan, as part of evidencing that shift to a preventative approach. So what we intend to do with that is, you'll be aware that we have our delivery plan, and we have delivery plan projects, and we report against these projects on a monthly basis to senior leadership team, on a quarterly basis to our risk audit and performance committee, and on an annual basis to IJB. So what we have done in that report is we've added a column in which and identified the tier of each of the projects. So whatever the project is doing, what tier that relates to, and you will see these reports coming through. We've done that from the year 2 of the delivery plan onwards, So when we start to bring reports around about that, you will start to see how many of our projects are in which tier. And as we track that through the years, we will hopefully be able to demonstrate perhaps a shift from where we are at the minute, and quite heavily in response mode, although we do have quite a lot in prevention and early intervention. But as we move through the years, perhaps seeing that shift there. You'll also recall that we're going to add finance into our reporting as well, so that will tie that up as well in terms of you'll see which tier it's in, and you will be able to see what proportion of projects are in which tier, and also proportion of spend.
Thanks, Alison. Any questions or comments? Right.
Thanks, Alison. Really welcome this. I think it's really important we start getting visible around what we're doing around prevention. I suppose I'm thinking of us working as a whole system, and I'm wondering if there are similar conversations with NHS Grampian that have been had, or the other IJBs around them also using this. Because I think the more we're talking the same language and using the same ways of looking at prevention, the more we'll be able to do that as a whole system. I'm happy to support that.
Yeah, could I maybe ask Phil to come in and respond to that? I did have a conversation with Phil around about how we can link with NHS Grampian.
I think the simple answer is yes, they are linked. The more complicated answer relates to the way in which we are conceiving the population health approach overall, within the context of Grampian as a whole, and then within each of the IJBs, and in the context of community planning. It's unfortunate that due to my circumstances I wasn't able to lead the conversation with the IJB around the population health approach late last year, and we will be revising the time to do that. But I think the simple thing here and now is this type of approach, both in the context of early intervention as a way of preventing disease processes from being initiated, and also understanding how to interrupt those processes to reduce the consequence of disease, and in the longer term any loss of independence or loss of quality of life, are at the heart of the overall approach that we're following. And I'm happy to take any further questions to explore that further, either here or offline.
Thanks for that, Phil. I think Fraser wants to come and add some comments.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think this is a really exciting piece of work for us. The IGB strategic plan places a heavy emphasis on prevention and early intervention. As Alison says, it's really one of the only ways that we'll be able to get services on a sustainable footing for the long term. I note in the report that went to council that there was going to be discussion of community planning partnership as well, to try and encourage other partners from the community planning partnership to approach that tiered analysis. And I think that'll be good, because I'll get everyone on, hopefully, for their methodology and what's a very important piece of work. There's discussion ongoing as well at the moment that I'm aware of within NHS Grampian, looking at how we measure the progress of the plan for the future. So I do think there's an opportunity there to have a discussion with relevant colleagues, and I'm happy to undertake that on our behalf as those discussions get going. And we're also looking at an officer level, trying to get around the table with our senior leadership team colleagues from Murray and Aberdeenshire in the coming weeks. So I think that this could actually be quite an exciting agenda item. Again, just to try and make sure that we're speaking the same language, adopting similar methodology where appropriate.
Thanks, Fraser. That's really good to hear.
I've been quite too long, so I think it's a really good piece of work. I think both organisations have made plain that their strategy needs to be prevention, it is the only way of surviving. So for me, from a workforce point of view, then there are major concerns, because can we get the right skills and the right skill mix here to be able to carry out the strategy itself. Now, the fact we've built this, or will build the strategy on that, there is a risk within there, because we know already that within certain clinical specialties especially, and I'm speaking about AHPs, etc., who have got a massive role in prevention and keeping folk out of hospital, we can't get them. We can't attract them to this area. We're having a difficulty, being quite honest, keeping them. So there is a bit that we need to keep in mind, that actually that basic bits have got to be done before this strategy will be successful. Otherwise, you are building a beautiful strategy that will go nowhere. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. That's a really useful insight. I mean, any officers want to, Sandra, do you want to?
Yeah, just come back, and I think Sandy's not on the call anymore, but I think there's a key part about working out with a workforce plan. And I think one of the key things that we're really at, also we're linked in through the multi-agency transformation group with the Angela chairs from, has all the universities and things like that. So what we're doing is really looking to our workforce aligned with the prevention and early intervention about what does that workforce need to look in the future. So you're absolutely right about AHPs and that, but there's also that really the step even before that, because some of that is early intervention, but it's the real prevention stuff. So how do we get about data and data analysis, the really community-based services, all of that. So it's a really good point, Mike, and we won't lose sight of it. So,
Don't worry, I'll keep an eye on the public recordings.
We might have to get you back as a consultant or something. Okay, any more comments, questions? There is a hand up. Two hands up.
Yeah.
All right, so Martin and then Angela. So Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is, I think, a really important report. I think that the tiered approach is really useful to see that in the diagram, and it does indicate that there's such a strong need to accelerate the shift to Tier 1, and I'm wondering how that can be driven more forcefully. The IJB is already meeting its prevention challenges, but I'm wondering if there's space for further action, further engagement, in order to really entrench that move to Tier 1. The report evidences considerable major advantages when thinking about needs and designing the most appropriate solutions. There are some good examples of innovation which has enhanced service delivery. There's mention there of the benefits from reducing the number of looked after children, and there's also mention of the support mechanisms for individuals who've left custodial sentences, and there's also mention of homelessness. And these are all areas of which relate to public health and clinical care, and in a time of public sector resource pressures, it's an area where it would be reassuring to know that we're all pushing forward on this preventative agenda together.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, do you want to come in, Fraser?
Yeah, don't disagree with what Martin's saying there, and I think there's always going to be scope to drive better engagement with our colleagues and residents within the city and beyond. And I think communication will be a key thing too, not just again for residents, but for colleagues. I do think that will require some courageous decisions in the future too, whether it's around this table or the tables of partners, because a number of the initiatives that are perhaps preventative are more long-term in nature before you start to see some of the results come through. So there's definitely an onus there for us to bring people with us, as well as get some rich input as well from those colleagues and residents to take us along the journey.
Thanks for that, Fraser. For those of you who remember Yes Minister, whenever Sir Humphrey says that would be a courageous decision, Minister, you meant don't do it, but actually think we should be doing it.
Chair, can I just come back? Yeah, I'm very much up for courageous decisions, and I hope that it will be possible for us to continue that innovative thinking because of the very considerable benefits that result. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Martin. Angela, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Councillor Cook. Just on a couple of the points that have been made in relation to Councillor Gregg's question around what are we going to do with this information. I guess the key thing is understanding our baseline. So in all the service activity that's going on within the partnership, where does it sit in that 3-tier? Not only the partnership's delivery of service, but also its providers through the third sector, and understanding where we're at in the balance across tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3, then we get a sense of how much more of a shift we need to make. It's clear we are already in the space of early intervention and prevention, but I guess the scale of the challenge, particularly because growing demand, means that kind of leap has got to go even further than the trajectory that we were on. So an understanding and being able to start to categorise activities based on where they sit on that spectrum, then I think that's where the opportunity comes to make a further shift. And in terms of what we commission our partners to do, but also more importantly what we do directly, and that's where I think Mike's point about the skills of our workforce to be able to shift. Prevention won't come from sitting in the health system. The prevention activity will take place out in communities. What we're trying to do is to reduce the demand that comes into the care system. So I think that workforce strategy is really key. And again, I think one of the instructions that colleagues in Aberdeen City Council got through the report to Council was about the development of a really comprehensive training package for colleagues. And again, I'd be happy to share that with colleagues within NHS Grampian, because I think critical to the ability to make the shift is an understanding about how as a workforce we support that shift rather than staying in the treatment side of things. So I think that's critical. And I just wanted to go back, I think it was Luann who asked the question around how are we joining this up, and I guess understandably colleagues have jumped to how we join this up within the health system. Again, I come back to the point that the real shift to prevention will come through the community planning partnership. So the immediate instruction that council colleagues got on the back of the report was to take this thinking directly into the community planning partnership of the city, and to then try and persuade colleagues, which would include NHS Grampian, into a wholesale systematic adoption of this approach. As you know, the local outcome improvement plan already places a lot of emphasis on early intervention and prevention. And so I think that from the city perspective, not from Grampian, from the city perspective, it's really important that the health and social care are a key part of the community planning partnership. So from the city boundary perspective, we will absolutely be taking this into the CPP, Luann, trying to influence police and fire and all of our other statutory partners within the city in order to adopt this. I'm then comfortable for colleagues to take this into the broader Grampian discussion, and of course Phil rightly references the North East Population Health Alliance, and I think that's an obvious place for us to move, but you know, our kind of patch, as it were, is the city, and so it's important that we adopt this right across all the partners that are operating within the city, and that's the intention, to take it forward. But as I say, the development of the skills programme will be critical, and again, I think it would be useful to socialise that with the board at a point in time as well. Thank you, Councillor Cook.
Thanks, Angela. That was really helpful. Mike?
Just to my point, so because the demand bit has come up several times, and no matter how good the report is, and it is, So your communications and for you're going to need to manage is number one, public expectation. And there is also the expectations of other organisations, etc. And yeah, basically keeping a reality check, because you can only do so much, you can only do it so fast, and being quite honest, we are in the financial situation, and there's going to have to be courageous decisions at some point. So for me, one of the big things within that is managing expectations, if it can be done and how quickly. Thank you.
Again, I think another absolutely spot on point. Yeah. Any more comments, questions? Okay, in which case can we note the report? Yep, thank you very much. Now that then brings us on to the last item, which is the implementation of Morse. Michelle, could I bring you in to talk us through this one, please?
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. So this paper is really just for noting by IJB, and it demonstrates the evaluation that we conducted with our community nurses around about the implementation of Morse. So in May 2021, we sat in front of IJB and we had a paper approved recommending the further implementation of Morse to our community nursing services, including hospital at home, Macmillan nursing and school nursing. This was following the application's successful implementation to our health visiting service. Morse is a third-party application that's produced by a Scottish company called Cambric, and it allows community services to operate an electronic patient record without always being connected to the internet. It does this by downloading 13 months worth of data onto a user's device and then syncing information when a Wi-Fi connection becomes re-established. So that in essence means that a nurse can start their day at home or in the office, download their patient list, and then not have to access Wi-Fi again until the end of the day when they sync that information up to share with the rest of their team. So the health visiting service in 2019 had several high-level risks associated with it and a number of vacancies within the service. And it was agreed to utilise the vacancy underspend to fund the procurement of Morse as an electronic patient record. And it was anticipated that the benefits that would come out of that would reduce some of the risks within the service and around about information sharing, and also reduce the amount of information being duplicated within the service. And that would reimburse the service, if you like, and allow it to focus on its delivery to the universal health visiting pathway. So a similar approach was taken to implement Morse to community nursing, and the evaluation was, or this evaluation was requested by IJB at that point. So the paper in front of you today uses the same questions that we utilised for health visiting when we evaluated the service, omitting the questions that were specific to COVID, as it wasn't really applicable. And as we hoped, the teams reported an increase in communication within their services and a reduction in the duplication of information. So using the sort of 30 minutes around about the reduction in duplication as a standard point, we conducted a sort of saving per user per day, which would amount to 15,000 hours worth of time per annum on an ongoing basis. And that could obviously be spent on other patient-facing tasks. And that amounts to over £350,000 per year on financial terms. However, the results were not quite as positive for community nursing as we had experienced from our health visiting colleagues. And we think this is down to three main reasons. Firstly, our community nurses used a new scheduling tool that had not been utilised anywhere else, and they were the first in Scotland to use it. And what came with that was a number of bugs that had to be worked through and fixed by the supplier, who were very responsive to our needs. But unfortunately for our needs, that fix came out with the terms of the evaluation by a couple of weeks. So a couple of the comments in the appendix related to the speed of the system we think is down to that bug fix. The second reason that we anticipate the difference in feedback was around about interfaces. So our hospital at home teams in particular have need to have large levels of communication with acute colleagues, and they would really benefit with an interface with TrackCare, which at the moment is not in place. However, we're working through that at the moment and hope that that would be in place within the next couple of months, and that should alleviate those concerns as well. And finally, it was around about the speed of implementation. So whereas with our health visiting service, we took just over a year from start to finish to implement to that service, we have taken a year to implement to 4 services who all have different needs and all required the system to be configured to allow their service to utilise Morse to the best of its potential. So the paper acknowledges that the implementation of Morse to AHPs is within our year 2 delivery plan, and the outcomes of our evaluation is sort of supportive to this progressing. And there's also an awareness of the interest in implementing Morse across Grampian. And following to today's IJB, the paper would be shared with Shire and Murray colleagues as well. So the evaluation concludes with a series of recommendations for our Morse user group to take forward. So firstly, around about our training and support method. I think we've realised we've probably come to the ceiling of our train the trainer approach. So we'd probably look for some dedicated trainer resource around that to ensure consistency when it comes to AHPs. We would look at the interfaces that we currently connect with and whether there's any opportunity to extend that. We're already in conversations around about establishing an interface with GP vision systems so that we can start to integrate GP data into that Morse suite. And we also recommend that the survey is conducted again in a year's time. So once that system's had time to bed in, once those our users have effectively taken that change into day-to-day practice, we would look to conduct the survey again to see if the benefits that we've highlighted, both from this evaluation and from the health visiting evaluation, are still realised. And then finally, to continue to support the implementation to AHPs, and then if it is taken further across Grampian, so that information sharing risk that currently exists with paper-based records is minimised for all our staff and patients. Okay, any questions at all?
Thanks for that, Michelle. Very, very clear explanation. Questions and comments? There's a hand up. Who is it? Sorry, Jenny? Jenny Gibb.
Hi, thank you, and thanks Michelle for sharing that with us today. I just wanted really to add, I guess, some support around how Morse has been implemented across Aberdeen City, and I know that from a financial perspective, sometimes there's some anxieties when we want to turn posts into IT, for example. But actually, I think the results have been borne out in a really positive way, insofar as just the time that you're talking about in terms of what's been saved there. We do have issues with vacancies across, all of our nursing groups, but yes, including within our community nursing teams as well. So actually the addition of technology is really helping them to undertake their really important role within the communities. I suppose the other thing to think about is from the patient safety perspective, and we know that paper records cause all sorts of challenge for us. So actually it makes access much easier. It reduces any risk around the sharing of information as well, when we're talking about patients moving in and out of the areas as well, so and across different parts of the system. And I guess one of the things that I think is really important for our nursing colleagues is that across NHS Grampian, there are a wide variety of IT systems that our nurses engage with, but actually for community nursing, there really hasn't been anything up to this point. And really for parity in terms of them being able to undertake their role, I think it's absolutely vital. and just thinking about how, we've spoken already about workforce, but will that impact on staff retention? I think when staff feel valued, when they're given the tools to do their job, then it's really, really important and makes them feel, like I say, just really valued. I get the bit about the practical issues, but it does sound like, a lot's been done to actually undertake, try and minimise some of that. And being part of the team that's looking to roll this out across NHS Grampian, I guess I could safely say that the green-eyed monster pops up within Shire and Murray quite frequently around this. We've got a not insignificant piece of work that we're about to undertake for AHPs and our nursing teams, AHPs in City, but our nursing teams across all three the other two partnerships. So definitely in a better place with this, and yeah, just thank you for the report, Michelle. Thank you.
Thanks for that contribution. Some really good points there. Any more, Luann?
Thanks, and thanks, Michelle, for the report. We've talked about courageous decisions and thinking about that happening in the future, but actually this is one of the early courageous decisions that we made as an IJB, where we took money that was sitting in staff vacancies and invested it in digital. So really good to see how this has progressed. Obviously not without its challenges, as any big change like this will be. And I suppose my question is, digital is a big part of our strategy, and from now on, how are we taking the learning from